Welcome to Kitchen Table Finance, the podcast where we serve up bite-sized pieces of financial advice to simplify your money and your life.
Hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Finance. We have a special guest with us today, Miss Kim Barber from Globetrotter Travel, who's going to try to help us figure out the complexities, or maybe it's not complex at all. It seems complex to me, at least, of travel, specifically retirement travel. As Kim and a lot of our listeners know, we do a lot of retirement planning, and one of the big things that's always on our list is people want to travel when they retire. And so I thought it would be great to have Kim join us on the show and tell us a little bit about how to plan that travel, how to think about it, what's out there, what kind of costs you can kind of plan for when we're budgeting for things like travel. And so excited to kick that off. Dave, unfortunately, couldn't join us today, so he's doing some traveling of his own right now. He's down in South Carolina for a while, so we let him off the hook. But really excited to have you on today, Kim, and would love for you to just give our listeners some background on your business and how it kind of came to be and how you came to be joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Yes, I have owned Globetrotter Travel for 10 years this year. And before launching Globetrotter Travel, my agency a decade ago, I worked at a storefront agency in Okemos, and I went to CMU and studied tourism and recreation there. So always kind of knew I wanted to work in the travel tourism world. Didn't necessarily see myself as a travel advisor, but that's where I landed and where I've decided I'd like to stay for. I really enjoy planning trips for other people, and particularly I get really excited about planning bucket list trips that are kind of once in a lifetime. So yeah, that's who we are in a nutshell, and happy to be here.
That's awesome. So I already learned something. I didn't even know travel was a degree that you could do, or how somebody became a travel advisor.
Sure.
So I just thought that was something that people picked because they didn't know what they wanted to do, but turns out it actually translates into something, huh?
Yes, I am one of probably the rare travel advisors who actually has a degree in tourism and hospitality. A lot of people do it as a second career or a side job, after they've done a first career. But yeah, this is where I landed. And yes, my focus in school was hospitality and tourism.
Very cool. So I'd like to shift a little bit to planning and budgeting for travel, especially looking at those retirement years. So what are some of the key financial considerations for our new retirees when it comes to travel?
I definitely think planning early, regardless, but for retirement as well, planning early is a good thing. It really only benefits you in terms of pricing and availability. It depends on the type of trip you're looking at. Airfare, for example, is only released 11 months prior to travel, so you really can't plan for airfare further out than 11 months, but a lot of cruise lines or resorts open up their availability a couple years in advance. And generally speaking, you're going to get the best rates when you plan early. And then on top of that, you also get to spread out the payments a bit more. Generally, depending on the type of trip, you would just pay one initial upfront deposit to hold the price and hold the space. And then we'll just kind of say generally 120 days prior to your departure is like a typical final payment date. So the earlier you kind of start planning, the more time you have to spread out those payments. If you want to make it a monthly payment, not take the hit of making the full payment all at once. That's kind of the best advice I can give is planning early to get the best rates and to spread out those payments.
So I'm curious, what do you see as some of the ranges? It's one of the things when we do retirement planning is if travel's a goal, we kind of arbitrarily throw out a number of hey, $10,000 a year sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
What does $10,000 a year buy someone? How many trips are we talking? What kind of how big a trips, or does it really depend on what kind of traveling you're doing?
It definitely depends on the type of travel you're doing. And I work with a variety of clients. I have honeymoon couples who have a $3,000 budget for a trip, and I have retirees who are doing a once in a lifetime bucket list African safari, and, it's averaging $25,000, $30,000. So there's a significant range. But I would say, on average, $10,000 a year is a healthy budget. It would get you kind of one big, let's say, European trip for anywhere from 7 to 14 days, depending on the style of accommodations you're choosing and the types of activities and tours you're doing. Airfare kind of is increasingly just at an all-time high. So airfare is what it is, but otherwise, if you're thinking, a little bit smaller scale, traveling domestically or even within Mexico and the Caribbean where it's a little bit closer to home, we can fly pretty easily nonstop to Cancun, for example, from Detroit year round. Those trips kind of average more $4,000, $5,000 for, a couple, for example. So you could do a couple trips like that per year with a $10,000 budget. It really just depends, on the scale of the trip and then kind of your preferences when it comes to accommodations and touring and things like that.
So I'm curious how one of the other things when we're talking about travel as a part of your retirement plan is, we're usually looking at it from the standpoint of maybe a little bit more in the early, or we sometimes we call them the go-go years of retirement and kind of tapering off. I'm curious if your experience with retirees traveling is similar. Like, do you have a lot of people in their 80s and 90s that are still doing a bit of traveling, or does it, what do you see on your side?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have an amount of people who are in their 80s and 90s still traveling, and there are travel products and suppliers out there who really cater to that demographic. And then I have a lot of the more younger retirees who are, freshly retired, younger, still fairly mobile and able to get around fairly easily, and that's probably where more of my clientele lies. But yeah, I have some very ambitious and I want to be just like them travelers who
Right.
are in their 80s and their 90s, and a lot of them are solo travelers now, if their spouse is no longer around, and there's some great opportunities for them to join like other solo travelers on trips or to join a guided tour where you're with a group and you still have that option for kind of camaraderie and traveling together with a small group. So yeah, it's a range, but generally kind of that 50 to 75, 78 is kind of where the majority of my retiree clients are.
Sure. So I'm curious, you brought this up a little bit, but that was one of my big questions for you as well, is a lot of times we get single people, a lot of widows looking to still travel, but maybe not necessarily having, friends that want to travel with them. What do people do? It just sounds like there's some things out there for group travel or getting in with other people that are in similar situations. What do you see out there for that?
Yeah, there's absolutely a lot of good options. Everybody has kind of their own preferences when it comes to travel. If you like cruising, whether it be ocean or river cruising, that's pretty easy to do solo. There are generally single supplement costs when there's only one person in a room versus two, but a lot of the times the cruise lines will run promotions where they waive those single supplements. So that can be a nice way, where you can still have your independence and your kind of time to yourself. But if you want to be social, you can go to a lounge, you can go to like a common area and have some interaction with other people. There's also like for women in particular or widows or, just solo female travelers, there's a number of tour operators who are doing women only trips. So, people who are single travelers can join up and even be matched in a lot of cases with a roommate. If you want to keep the cost down a little bit more, you
Wow.
can be matched up in that type of scenario. And then there are just kind of regular small group land guided tours where any solo person can book into that group. If it's a small group, generally they average 16, 18, 20 passengers. So you'll have a tour guide and, all of the itinerary is kind of preset and you don't have to stress about a lot of it, but you also are traveling with a group and having that, again, the ability to share meals with other travelers and tour with them and kind of, have the opportunity to make some friends and have some conversation along the way. So I have a decent number of solo travelers on my client list, and there's an increasing number of tour options out there for them.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm, when I think of travel right now, my kind of travel that I enjoy is getting away from work and relaxing. And so, as my wife likes to call it, being a starfish and just laying on the beach and doing nothing for a week. But I
Yep.
have to imagine, as you retire and you don't have work, it's not so, pressing to have some of those vacations where you're not doing anything. So I'm curious if you see a shift in people who are traveling for retirement that want to be a little bit more active, or is it just kind of a personal preference thing? What kind of things do you see out there that maybe change when people start traveling in retirement versus when they're working?
Yeah, I mean, I do think a lot of it is personal preference. There are those people that will only ever want a vacation in warm weather destinations, and to go on vacation somewhere cooler is just not something that they would consider. But I do see that a lot of people do have these, once in a lifetime style bucket list type trips. A lot of people, African safari is one of those. But one of my bucket list trips is to go to Antarctica, and it's growing in popularity. There's a growing number of operators who are offering it, and it's really become popular in recent years, where people would go on an expedition trip to Antarctica or the Arctic Circle, for example. So I do see a lot of those happening in early retirement. They are, of course, kind of bigger ticket trips than your average Mexico Caribbean. I mean, you're certainly paying more, you're traveling further, you're traveling longer. It's probably something you're only going to do once in your life. So it does come down to personal preference, but Antarctica, Arctic Circle, Safari, Australia, New Zealand, those are kind of some of those adventurous type trips that I'm seeing a lot for those people who are newly retired.
Sure. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on, trying to figure out when you retire what kind of travel you want to do. Is there a way to like dip your toes in the water of some more adventure travel before maybe you take the boat to Antarctica? What what are
Yeah.
some options?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think in determining your travel preferences, a lot of it is trial and error. I took a trip in January that I'm not mad that I took, but would I do it again? Probably not. But I'm glad I did it, and so I do think there is some amount of trial and error, but certainly, yes, Antarctica is a big commitment in terms of time, in terms of money. So if you're not sure, for example, if that's the right kind of trip for you, if you're sort of intrigued but not all the way sure, there are other expedition style cruises you can do a little bit closer to home, maybe a little bit less extreme temperatures. So,
Hmm.
you could try something out similar to decide if you think that would be a good fit for you. I mean, I know obviously I'm probably a little bit biased here, but I do think partnering with an experienced travel advisor is to your advantage if you're not really sure what your preferences are, because
Yeah.
I know there are certain travel suppliers out there. As soon as you hit 50, for example, those brochures start coming into your mailbox every
Oh,
single
sure.
day. So you might only be aware that, for river cruise lines, for example, that there's one company out there. But in reality, there's 10, 12 really good options to choose from. So I think if you're not really sure of your preferences, it can be helpful to talk to a travel advisor who's kind of in it every day. I can hear what your preferences are and then make a recommendation based on, what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up, and I know that you're somewhat biased, but I consider myself not necessarily biased because I've kind of gone both ways.
Mhm.
And it was probably like what 4 years ago, maybe even longer than that, that you and I started working together. Just
Mhm.
from the sole fact of there's just so much information out there, and I just get in the rabbit hole of like, oh my God, there's a million different things on the internet that I can find from flights to different places. And I have no idea whether one of them's better than the other.
Sure.
And like having someone that knows those things and can like break that down for me, it just gets to a point where it's, almost analysis paralysis, where there's just so much stuff out there that I just don't do anything. I feel like a lot of people are in that same boat. But then there's this negative connotation of, well, if you work with a travel advisor, it's going to cost you so much more money, which, by the way, personally, I think it's worth it, even if it did. But I'm guessing it's probably not as much as what people think. Do you want to maybe talk to us a little bit
Yeah.
about that?
Absolutely. Yes. For years, travel advisors haven't really charged anything additional for their services. I always say this, there's always a commission built into the price of travel, regardless of where and how you're booking it. So if you are
Hmm.
booking your travel yourself online, you are paying this for the services of a travel advisor. And if you're doing it online yourself, you're not getting those services. I recognize there's people out there who enjoy doing that planning. There's also a lot of people who don't enjoy it and do get overwhelmed. And then those are the people I find who are coming to me. But ultimately, more so in recent years, I will say, kind of since 2020 and beyond, the industry standard is that a lot of travel advisors do charge fees. And I certainly understand it. I respect it, all of the things. I personally, for the majority of my trips, I still do not charge planning fees unless it's a really complicated sort of itinerary. I might charge a nominal fee to cover my time. As a lot of people learned in 2020, trips got pushed. We started planning them in 2019. They got canceled and rebooked a few times. And so there was basically a 2-3 year period where you're waiting for commissions to come in after people travel. And it took 3 years for those checks to come in, if they came in at all, because a lot of people decided not to travel. So in recent years in particular, basically since 2020, a lot of travel advisors do charge fees. And what I would say to that is, I think it's worth it as well. I totally understand why a lot of agencies do it. For me, I've mostly made a decision that in the market that I work in, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for me to implement those fees on a lot of the trips that I plan. So it's rare that I would, but ultimately, what I just always tell people is do your research like anybody else that you're hiring. If you're hiring a travel advisor, do your research, read their reviews. Because there are a lot of people who have a ton of experience, 30 years, in Italy specifically. So if you're planning a trip to Italy, and someone is charging a $500 planning fee, they've got 30 years of experience that's worked into that fee and a lot of good input. Generally speaking, for a lot of travel advisors, it does not cost any more to work with them. Even if there is a nominal fee, I think it is well worth it. In the case, particularly if you have a once in a lifetime bucket list trip that you're not going to repeat, you really want to make sure you do it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious if, let's say, somebody has 3, 4, 5 different destinations on their bucket list. Is that something that you could kind of help them figure out, like, okay, do this one first, or how to prioritize those?
Absolutely. Yes. And particularly as we talk about budgeting, for example, I mean, if somebody's never been to Mexico and they just want to go and be a starfish for a week, that's something that's a little bit more easier managed and a quicker timeline probably for the average person than, for example, on the other side of the spectrum, an African safari, which does have a lot more cost and components involved. So I can certainly, chat with people and determine, okay, if these are your priorities for the next 5 years, here's what kind of makes sense from a financial standpoint, saving and making monthly payments. And then also just kind of taking into consideration world events and things that are happening. I mean, I've rerouted a few people from certain destinations kind of this year and said, maybe we should hold off a year or two. And on those ones in particular. So yes, I can certainly help people kind of decide what makes the most sense. Or if I'm seeing that, for example, this year, I'm going to not probably repeat this correctly, but they're celebrating Jubilee this year. So they're anticipating a record-breaking number of tourists to Italy this year. So if you have to go to Italy this year, myself, I mean, I have a trip that is organized that I have to get to Venice to start a cruise. So there's no getting around it for me. I'm going to pay the higher airfare prices into Italy this year. But if it's something that's on your list, but you don't necessarily need to go for the Jubilee celebration, I'd say maybe put it off until next year. You won't pay these high prices that we're seeing this year for the airfare, and also really limited availability because a lot of people are traveling to Italy this year. I can kind of help with those sorts of decisions about what makes sense in the right order.
So I'm curious, and I think it was Italy, but it could have been somewhere else. But I've seen a little bit in the news some pushback on travel and tourism, and from some of the locals. Have you experienced or seen any of that?
I have. I know last summer, one that stands out to me was, I think it was Spain. I want to say it was Barcelona specifically.
Uh-huh.
There was a lot of anger from a group of locals regarding tourism. And I won't pretend that I understand all of the complexities of it. I mean, there's a big group of locals. This is true, I guess, of any tourism destination. There's a big group of people who appreciate the tourism because their livelihood depends on it, right? Then there's another group of people, and I think a part of this is this whole Airbnb vacation rental conversation where people come in and they're buying up these properties and renting them out as vacation rentals, and then the locals can't afford to live in the cities that they're working in, right? So there's a lot of complexities involved in it. But yes, I have heard of some of those. I think it was Barcelona last summer that was in the news a few times for protests, about the number of tourists and things like that. But ultimately, for the amount of people that were probably protesting it, there were probably an equal number of people who rely on those tourists for their survival. So it's just one of those things, there's going to be, I guess, two sides to all of that. For the most part, I've traveled quite a bit over the last year internationally and I have not experienced any. I also don't do a lot of like vacation rentals. I mostly am in hotels, resorts, but I have not personally experienced any sort of pushback to tourism, any of the places that I've traveled.
Yeah, it's interesting, and actually, it's probably something that's not a new phenomenon, right? Like, I grew up in Spring Lake, Michigan, which is right next to Grand Haven, and
Sure.
tourist season is, Memorial Day to Labor Day, and we used to
Yep.
get the traffic all of a sudden goes from nothing to 30 minutes to get across town, and of course we were upset about it, but at the same time we were getting across town as kids to go work in the restaurants. And the only reason we were doing that is because there was a bunch of people coming to town.
Right.
So
same experience for me. I grew up in Higgins Lake, so same thing.
Yeah.
But I'm going to work at the state parks where all of the tourists are coming in the summer.
Right.
So yeah, it's a catch-22, but I see it from both sides for sure. And I just think this whole vacation rental piece has added a whole nother layer of complexity
for sure.
to it, because I think a lot of the locals around the world, I've encountered this, can't afford the cost of living in their cities.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a new dynamic with the advent of those. Kind of shifting gears a little bit. Obviously, getting older, being retired, health and safety issues probably become a little bit more concerning. What kind of recommendations do you have for people that are traveling, especially if you're traveling internationally, when it comes to maybe if you're limited in mobility or how do you plan for things like that?
Sure. Always number one recommendation, whether you're retired or not, travel insurance. I personally will not leave the country without it. I've only needed to use my travel insurance on a handful of occasions. And luckily for me, I've never had like a medical emergency or anything while I'm traveling. But probably because I am in this industry and I'm in it all day, every day, I hear the good things, but I hear the bad things as well. And I've heard one too many stories about people who have had a medical emergency overseas, or have needed emergency evacuation for whatever reason, and they don't have insurance, and the costs are just astronomical. So for me, it's worth it for peace of mind to have travel insurance. And like any other insurance, there's a range of products, there's a range of prices and coverage. At the very least, I recommend having medical coverage. Most of our medical insurance would not cover us internationally if we needed medical attention. So at the very least, to get a minimum medical coverage plan, it's actually fairly affordable. It's more affordable than people think most of the time to just get a medical policy. And then beyond that, coverage for like trip cancellation and those sorts of things I think are important as well. But the main thing would be for medical and emergency evacuation. It's rare, but those situations do come up. I just did a cruise a couple weeks ago. It was my 30-something cruise that I've done. And on this one, nobody was medically airlifted off of, but I've probably seen people medically airlifted off of cruises 5 or 6 times in my life. So it's just one of those things that emergency, helicopter flight out at sea back to the mainland is not inexpensive.
I can't imagine it is.
No, I've never seen the bill for one, but I know that it's not an inexpensive feat. So travel insurance will always be my number one recommendation. I guess kind of getting more like when it comes to mobility, there's a growing number, I think, as more and more suppliers are sort of aware of this. There's more suppliers who are just focused specifically on, mobility and tours that are specific for people with mobility challenges. There are types of trips that are better designed. River cruises, for example, in Europe, and some cruise lines do it better than others, but designed for people who maybe are more limited in their mobility, but they still want to travel. It can be a really nice way to travel. You still get to see 6 or 7 different places, but your hotel moves with you. So it's just kind of a more comfortable way to see the sights. And if you want to get off, at one town and explore because you're having a good day, great. And if the next day you're tired and you don't want to, you have that option as well. So I think there's different travel types that make sense for mobility concerns. And when it comes to safety, a number of different thoughts come to mind. But one that I will always say is if you have any, medications or mobility aids or devices, medical devices that you absolutely need, make sure that especially when it comes to air travel, that you're keeping those in your carry-on and that you're not checking them if your checked luggage does get lost. And then not to carry all of the money that you've brought with you around with you. When I get to my hotel, I'm leaving the bulk of the money in the safe in the room and then just taking out what I think I might need for the day.
Very good advice. Stuff that I would never think of. I want to go back a little bit to the insurance because I can't remember if it was my client, but I was just talking to somebody about this. And I think it was their mom that had, I don't know if it was a heart attack or something, but the insurance company flew somebody out to be with her, to take her on the plane, to get her and brought her all the way to like her front step. And it was a broken leg. I can't remember exactly what it was, but
Sure.
just stuff that I would never even think about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like I said, I'm fortunate. I've never needed to use mine for any sort of medical emergency, but I was on a trip a couple years ago with a lot of my colleagues. It was an agent retreat and it was our very last stop. A group of people did a bike tour one day. I wasn't on the tour, but a younger able-bodied person just fell off of her bike. I don't remember the specifics. I wasn't there, but shattered her kneecap on the last day. She was a travel advisor. She obviously had travel insurance. They took care of everything. They got her home. I'm pretty sure she I mean, she was obviously in pain. She got to fly home in business class because she needed to have that leg stretched out, and you can't do that in economy. So, I think it's one of those things people assume that insurance is going to cost more than it does. And there are very expensive policies out there. But at the very minimum, if you just want to get medical coverage or emergency evacuation coverage, it can be very affordable to get that and have that peace of mind.
Yeah, when I think of, the first thing that pops into my head when travel insurance comes up is like, every time you go to book a airline flight and they want you to spend $30 so that you don't lose out, $300 of your trip, which, at the end of the day isn't really worth it. But the stuff you're talking about is like emergency evacuation. The cost of insurance is going to be minimal compared to what that bill would actually be. So much more worth it from an insurance standpoint.
I always recommend insurance to a degree. The cancellation coverage is valuable, the lost baggage, the trip interruption. I mean, there is a lot of valuable coverage built in, but I admittedly recommend it a lot less frequently on domestic trips because domestically you have medical insurance, most likely. If you're renting a car, your auto insurance will cover you domestically with your rental car. So there's just factors that, when you're leaving the country, that's really when my recommendation for travel insurance becomes a lot more strong.
Sure.
And a lot of tour operators and companies out there, I mean, I have people say, yes, I accept, or no, I decline travel insurance. So they at least, I have record that they were offered it. But a lot of tour operators actually are requiring that people buy insurance. If they're not going to buy insurance, they won't accept them on the trip.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
What is the best travel advice that you've ever received or given?
I thought about this question a little bit. I think the main thing, there's two, I'm really torn between two. So I'm going to give you two of them.
Sure.
The first one would be to be flexible because no matter how much planning we do or you do, if you're planning it on your own, we of course want everything to go smoothly and we do our best to put all those plans in place. But travel almost never goes 100% according to plan, nor does life really for that matter. But being flexible is key. If something happens and your flight's delayed or your train operator goes on strike or whatever it is, just be flexible. And having that acceptance that there are some things that are outside of your control and, and just knowing that that's going to happen, setting those expectations before you leave, I think is a good mindset to have. The other thing for me that stands out and it's from personal experience to some degree. I guess I'm fairly well traveled for my age, probably given my career and my passion for travel. But I had an aunt who died unexpectedly, relatively young. I just remember talking to her. I did my internships at the end of my tourism and travel degree. I did them in New Zealand and Australia, and I lived there for the better part of a year. And I came back from that trip, and I was talking to her all about it. She was so interested. She was asking me all these questions. So excited about her possibility of doing that trip when she retired. And sadly, unfortunately, a few years after that, she passed very unexpectedly, rather young. And there's not a day that goes by where I don't think about it. So for me, that comes down to, you hear it all the time. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. It's true. It's true. It's cliche, but
Yeah.
just don't put off there are some trips that financially we have to put off, or from a time perspective we have to put off, but don't put off all of your bucket list trips, all of the trips you want to do until you're retired, because life happens and we're not guaranteed those opportunities. So I
Yeah.
think that's something that has just stuck with me, not to put off those things that I really want to do, to make them happen as I'm able to, and not wait for retirement.
I love that advice. And it's kind of, most financial advisors might tell you differently to, save more
Right.
for retirement and put it
Sure.
off. But I got to tell you, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people, especially when you're looking at that budget or that bucket list and thinking about all the things you want to do. There's a lot of research around like, hey, maybe you can do that stuff now. You're more able to do it now. And maybe that, the trade off is working a couple extra months. Like for most people, that's probably worth it, right? And so
Sure.
working with somebody that can help you figure that out. But you're right, there's no guarantee of tomorrow. So, you want to make sure that you can, one of the things I say to people around here all the time is we want to make sure you can do what you want to do today, but also still be able to do it tomorrow as well. And what's that balance, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. I think it is about finding that balance. I don't know. Maybe I think about my aunt, regularly, because it was very unexpected, and she just was going to do all these things when she retired. But over the last month, I've had more so acquaintances, but some younger people pass unexpectedly, like 3 or 4 of them, people that I know. And I just think, people in their late 30s, early 40s. And I just, I don't know. I think it's fresh in my mind at the moment because I've had that experience recently. And so, yeah, I think it's about finding that balance, saving for your retirement, but also not putting off all of those things you want to do until retirement.
Yeah, love that. All right, so I've got some rapid fire questions for you that I didn't share
All
with
right.
you earlier. So I'm curious what happens here. We're just going to go
Okay.
for it.
I like it.
What do you think? What's your best beach destination for retirees?
That's such a good question. I've done Hawaii a couple times recently. I really love Hawaii. And
Yeah.
they're not as impacted by like some of the sargassum seaweed issues that we're seeing in Mexico and the Caribbean. So I'm going with Hawaii.
Okay. Hawaii, love it. On my bucket list, by the way.
Awesome.
What do you think is the most underrated travel destination?
It maybe is a little obvious, but I guess Mexico for me. I mean, a lot of people are like, "Oh, I've been to Mexico." It kind of feels domestic for a lot of people because it
Yeah.
is so close. We can get there in 3 hours, but it's affordable. They do have beautiful beaches and great weather. And I do have a lot of retirees, kind of older clients who go for anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks in the winter months when they're trying to get away. So I think it's underrated because a lot of people rule it out because they've done it already, but it's a really
Yeah.
big country. And there's a lot to see there. I mean, I've been to Mexico countless times and there's still so much of it that I haven't seen. So Mexico.
Love it. Best city for food lovers.
Mm, these are good. What comes to mind is, I Seattle is coming to mind right away for me. I love the market in Seattle, and they
Oh
have so
yeah.
many. I did a really great food tour there one time, and just so many places that every time I go back to Seattle now, I hit some of those spots from that food tour again and again. So that's what's coming to mind.
Best country for budget conscious travelers like myself.
I mean, Mexico again, it jumps right
Yeah.
out. Dominican Republic and Jamaica for like close to
Mm.
home countries. Those are all good bang for your buck. Costa Rica is another one, also relatively close to home. A lot of expats there, pretty affordable cost of living. And then beyond that, if we want to go to Europe, I would say Portugal.
Okay. Yeah. What's your favorite hidden gem you've discovered?
That one's a curveball. I guess for me, and it's not, I don't know that it's hidden, but like for me, I thought that African safari was going to be a once in a lifetime bucket list trip for me. I truly did. The first time I went was in 2019. I thought it was going to be a one and done. I am
Yeah.
leading a group there later this year for my 10th. It'll be my 10th time in Africa on safari
Wow.
since
That's
2019.
awesome.
So it's not really like a hidden gem. I think it's on a lot of people's bucket list, but African safari gave me the travel bug all over again. And so I think if it's on your list, again, it's one of those things, it's going to cost a little bit more, but like, don't wait until you're 75 to do it. Do it a little sooner, because some of the people who are going, who I have taken to Africa on trips over the last few years have now gone back for second and third trips as well. And they were in the same position thinking it would be a once in a lifetime. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but that's what came to mind.
Did. Love it. So you've been on 30 cruises. What's the best cruise destination?
I really like cruising the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
I mean, the Caribbean's great and it's close to home and it's, more affordable, but those Greek Isles, there's just nothing else like them.
Yeah.
But I haven't done Antarctica yet. I think when I do Antarctica, that'll be my answer.
I love it. I'm going to have to make sure that I tell my wife not to listen to this episode or we might be in trouble. Last one. What's the best place for history buffs?
Generic answer, Europe. There's obviously a ton of history there. The architecture, the churches, Europe in general comes to mind. I would not call myself a history buff. So I've done a lot of travel in Europe and I appreciate the history and I enjoy it when I'm there and I'm reading about it. I just don't really retain it. But I mean, there's just architecture and history in Europe that we don't have here because we're younger.
Yeah. When I went to Europe on a trip that you helped us plan, by the way, just the feeling of being on, like standing on grounds where, there's been people there for thousands of years. It's just crazy to me, right?
Yeah, it is.
Structures that have been around that long. It's wild.
It is wild. It's wild. And we just don't have a lot of that. I mean, certainly we have parts of the US that we have some of that, but you can go almost anywhere in Europe and, there's these hundreds-year-old cathedrals and it's really, like I said, not a history buff. I appreciate it when I'm there and I'm hearing about it and reading about it. I just can't, repeat it after the fact.
Yeah. Kim Barber, thank you for joining us today. Would love to, why don't you let us know where our listeners might be able to reach out to you in case they have some questions or want you to plan a trip for them.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. We are on the web at myglobetrottertravel.com. And you can reach out via email. My email is my name, Kim Barber, at myglobetrottertravel.com. There's a contact form on the website. And also phone is a valid option as well. We're at 517-920-0465.
Awesome. And I cannot recommend your services highly enough. I know you've been starting to get phone calls from my friends and family as well, which I truly appreciate. And I will make sure we put all your contact information into the show notes so our listeners can find those there as well. Kim, it's been a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for joining us for another chat about your retirement and finances. Please hit that subscribe button. You can also contact us at srbadvisors.com or email us at info@srbadvisors.com. See you next time on Kitchen Table Finance.
This is a Zedia Media production.